Those darn mirrors don't lie. This is going to be fun. Y'all ready? How many of you have ever used the phrase hot mess? Actually, this phrase goes all the way back to the 19th century because way back then, hot mess referred to a mess hall or a mess kit. It was literally a military term. Well, in the 20th century, it took on a different meaning. It was still a military term. However, it referred to a dangerous environment, a firefight where a group of soldiers found themselves in a volatile situation. Oftentimes, they would be heard to say, "We've gotten ourselves into a hot mess." But then in the 21st century, with the evolution of the word hot mess is now defined as an attractive disaster. Somebody whose life is in disarray and yet they continue to be functional and they still manage somehow to look good. They still show up for work, they show up for school, they show up for worship, and they look a lot better than their circumstances. Based on this newly discovered definition by me, then I have to stand here and confess to you that I am, in fact, a hot mess. A lot of chaos going on behind the scenes, but I do my best to function at a high level, and I try to look good doing it. The truth is, if you're honest, and I think by the time I finish this sermon you'll agree, you're a hot mess too. You're a hot mess too. Isn't this sort of your unspoken goal in life, to handle the mess, the chaos that's thrown your way, to continue to press forward and to try to look good doing it? Regardless of what's going on at home, on the job, with the kids, with the spouse, you want to show up and you want to present well. Now think about it. Wouldn't it be awesome if our lives today were as amazing as our social media profile pictures? I looked at all my profile pictures this past week. I went all the way back from when I first started on Facebook and looked at a lot of those, and I thought, I don't present the truth on social media. This is one of the ones that I got this James Bond thing going on, and I thought, that looks nice, and I clean up okay. But if I had to present socially the current state of my life, I'd have to post this as my profile picture. Right? Right now I'm picking on me, but I'm getting to you. I'm getting to you. Because I would love this, I would love it if everybody in the room would go home and post a real profile picture that represents the current state of effects and affairs in your life. A lot of people, these days won't go to church, and one of the number one reasons actually, maybe right at there at the top, that I hear a lot anyway, is those church people, they're so fake. And I'll clean that up because they usually say it's just a bunch of hypocrites in the church, and I don't want to go to church with hypocrites. But for me, I try to be very transparent, try to be very honest, and I'd rather be called a hot mess than a hypocrite. Honest about my flaws, but I choose to try to present well, keep my head high, face it with integrity. I don't want to lie to anybody. I'm a hot mess. I know it. You know it. So we might as well admit it today. If you've always pushed away from the church because of the hypocrites who present stunning profile pictures, but you know them without all the filters, I want to try to help you today. Welcome to Crosspoint, where everybody is a hot mess. Everybody. You're surrounded by a whole bunch, rows and rows of hot messes. Because we've all got a mess going on somewhere in our lives, but we just clean up good, So in this series, I'm going to talk about all kinds of messes, okay? We're going to cover a lot of ground. We're going to talk about financial messes. You've gotten yourself into a financial mess because of debt or something that is way beyond your control. And you might have found yourself saying, man, I've got a financial mess in my life. Maybe a family mess. Marriage, isn't going quite as good as you'd hoped that it would. And then something happened and you find yourself now in a relational mess. Health-related messes, sometimes of our own volition. We just don't take care of ourselves. And then sometimes things just happen that are beyond your control. Professional messes. Maybe you hate your job and you took it because you had to have a paycheck and you just feel like your professional career is just a mess and you're trying to find your niche. Maybe it's an academic mess. And I'm sorry to even bring this up because we have a lot of students from UNCP and UNCW and Raleigh that come here on the weekend, and they're trying to escape the GPA mess that they're in, and then they come to church on Sunday, and the preacher they thought they loved brings it up and wants to talk about it, and now they're not so sure, so my apologies. But there are all kinds of messes. Let's be honest, some of you married a mess. Vernette. Brother G is not here, but she was talking about y'all. She was amen to me. But let's be honest, some of you married a mess. In fact, you were warned, right? Think about it. You were warned. If you go back to it, his previous 3 girlfriends took you out for coffee and said, honey, don't do this. And you were like, oh, but I can fix him. I can fix him. But now you know. You can fix a dog. And I found out during a break you can fix a spouse too. So it kind of ruined my thought. So there you go. But you said somebody corrected me during the break and ruined my whole thought there. Or maybe you're the person that said, you know what? I'm not marrying her mama. I'm not marrying her daddy. I'm not marrying her family. But you found out, didn't you? When you moved in together, she brought the crazy part of the family with her. It just took a while for it to show up. Because, you married the whole family, and I've preached this in a series before, but you married the whole family whether you realize it or not, because we're all a product of our environment on some level, and if you don't have a plan to flush that, it has a tendency to stick around. Now, maybe life is good for you right now, and you're going, this series isn't relevant for me. I don't have a hot mess in my life right now, but let me just warn you, you're just one dumb decision away from creating a brand new hot mess in your life. Whether you're Christian or some other religion or no religion, the thing we all have in common in life are the messes we make. Now, sometimes we deal with messes that we make. Sometimes we inherit messes, and sometimes we don't know how we fell into this mess. Sometimes I'm out cutting my grass, and all of a sudden I start smelling something. And I realize it's happened again. My tires found the mess that my neighbor's dog tends to make in my yard, usually when they're walking their dog. I'm a little more upset about that than what y'all are, but it happens a lot. I didn't cause it, but I just kind of stepped in it. You know how that goes, right? So it happens that you can find a mess that you're not even trying to, you had nothing to do with it. The reality, though, is this is life. This is life. You got to deal with the poo. That should have been the shirt. You got to deal with the poo. That would have been a better shirt. Here's the good news. She's already heard this sermon once. I don't know why it still got her. But it's not just you. It's not just your family, your marriage, your GPA. We are all a hot mess at some point in our lives, whether that's you're in that season now or you've come out of it, maybe you're on a reprieve, whatever. A hot mess is what we all have in common. And I think you all look great today. I think we all clean up well. It's a wonderful thing, to come to church and look good and smell good and all that goes with that. But if we could see a profile picture that shows the reality of your life, I'd love to see that this afternoon. It'd be such a fun afternoon on social media if you'd do that. You might not present so well, right? You know what I'm talking about? You're not going to do that, are you? No, you're not. Okay. The messiness of life is what we all have in common. It's what brings us all together. So before you criticize somebody else, remember, you are a hot mess too. You're a hot mess too. If not now, then soon, because you're one dumb decision away from the next hot mess season of your life. And isn't it true when you hear the story behind somebody else's mess? If you'll slow down long enough and listen to the details that landed them in the mess that they're in, sometimes instead of being critical after you've heard how they got there, you're sympathetic. You're sympathetic. And in fact, being sympathetic is far better than being critical. And as we look at what Jesus had to say today, we're going to discover that we shouldn't be so critical. And when it comes to other people that are a hot mess, we should be often more willing to be a student of their mess than a critic of their mess. Jesus said, before you get all wound up about the mess in somebody else's life, he said, go look in the mirror because those darn mirrors don't lie. They just don't lie. You're focused on the speck of dust in someone else's eye, and you've got a plank in your own eye. That's out of Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 through 5. But here's what I want you to do. Everybody kind of pat your eye, one or the other, and say, pull the plank. That is a better use of your time, trying to get the plank out of your eye than the speck out of somebody else's. That's what Jesus would say to us today. Now look, sometimes we dig ourselves a hole so deep that we can't crawl out of it on our own. We need somebody to throw us a rope, lend a hand, give us a push or a pull out of the muck and the mire that we have behaved ourselves into. This past week, we had a horrific experience at my house on a Wednesday when we had our little man Lennox with us. Now, I've changed more poo diapers since Lennox has been born than I changed combined for Micah and Marissa. It just wasn't my thing. I couldn't do it. I have this gag reflex problem. That's what I'm saying. Don't start. It'll get bad up here. But Lennox had a blowout. And I thought I'd experienced about as bad as it could get. No. Did you know the older they get, the worse it gets? Wow. Anyway, I'm in the room, and the diaper gets peeled back, and oh, my Lord, have mercy. I'm just like, Sylvia happened to be there. And you know what she did? She threw me a rope to get me out of the mess that I had found myself in, and I just turned around and left the room. I just couldn't do it. Sometimes you just need a hand. You need somebody to help you out of the mess that you find yourself in. Great sermon illustration. Better than what you think it is. Now, let me just put this out there. Christians believe the thing that we have in common is the mess that brought God near to us. For God so loved the whole messy world, he looked down and he said, what a hot mess they're in, right? But I won't flood the earth again. I'm not going to burn it up. Instead, I'm going to send my one and only Son to clean up the mess that they're in. And when Jesus showed up, it was a surprise. In fact, one of the reasons people didn't recognize Jesus for who he was is because in ancient times, when people thought about God coming near or God addressing people, they expected a judge or some kind of a harsh judgment or some kind of a punishment or a lightning bolt kind of thing. They expected criticism. They prepared for the very worst. But when Jesus showed up, he introduced a word into the messes of the world that was so astounding and unexpected. He introduced the word grace. Everybody say grace. And nobody expected it, and nobody saw it coming, and most people missed it. So if you're a hot mess and you're trying to look good and stay functional, hey, I get that. We have that in common. Everybody in the room has that in common. But the gospel is for you because Jesus came into this world, and listen, not because he felt sorry for you, but because we had dug ourselves into a deep hole and we couldn't get out. We were in a mess. We were in a mess. And here's something else that Christians believe. The mess in your life is a lens, and if you can see your mess for what it is, in other words, if you can recognize a mess when you see one, then you can see God. You'll be able to see God. I'm going to unpack that and explain it, because to recognize one is to acknowledge the other. In fact, my hot mess is a lens through which I can discover God. God reveals himself. He reveals his presence, his reality within the context of my messy life. If you can recognize your mess, you are one step away from acknowledging God. And that's a big deal. Now, the Apostle Paul steps into history not as an apostle, not as a Christian, not as a Bible writer, but as a guy who was on mission to destroy the church. He believed Christians were trying to take Judaism in a crazy direction around some crucified Nazarene who twisted the law and had corrupted the temple, and he was hell-bent on putting a stop to it. So the Apostle Paul decided to shut down the church. God got his attention, and you know the story, the Damascus Highway and all that. The Apostle Paul was a brilliant man. He was a brilliant man, and he's had influence on Western culture and culture in the world, and there's been this great shift because of Jesus and Paul, man, just phenomenal influencers, and Paul, second only to Christ in the influence of where the world stands today, and he became an all-in follower of Jesus. So he begins establishing churches around the Mediterranean rim. And as he plants these churches, he started writing these letters to encourage them, the local church, to encourage their faith. And because the letters were so extraordinarily valuable, they were collected, they were copied, and today they're part of our New Testament, right? So the Apostle Paul goes into all kinds of extraordinary detail explaining these high-level theological concepts. He's the guy who introduces the idea that our messes are the lens through which we discover God, the presence and the power of God. Paul says, and I'm going to explain and kind of break this down because he's just a brilliant guy, and sometimes he tends to talk over our head. We have to really take the Scripture apart to understand what he said. So I'm going to take that step to try to help everybody in the room. He says this, now we know that whatever the law says, it says to those who are under the law. And that's just a fancy way of saying if you're under the law is over you. Now watch this. For example, if you're a student and you sign up to go to university, when you sign a contract to go there, the university rules then apply to you. And you're under those rules because the university is now over you. Are you tracking? I don't have to obey the rules of your university because I never got under those rules to begin with. Paul says that whatever law you're under, that law is over you, and he's talking specifically here in context about the law of God. The law of God in this context, though, can be several things, and it's several things to a whole lot of different demographics of people. If you're, for example, if you're an Orthodox Jew, it would be the actual law of God as is found in the Old Testament. If you're a Christian, it would be the law of Jesus. And the law of Jesus is this, that you treat other people the way that God, through Jesus, has treated you. And because we've made a mess in different areas, and we have that in common in different areas of our life, all of us fall short of the standard, either God's standard, the Old Testament standard, the New Testament standard, and we always have a lot of people here that are not Christians every weekend. It's a great place for seekers to come and lean into faith. But if you don't subscribe to any faith system right now, then the standard of your own conscience, because you cultivate a conscience whether you realize it or not. Non-believers violate their own conscience just like believers violate, like Christians violate the New Testament law of Jesus Christ. For Christians, our conscience is fed from a moral standard derived from the New Testament covenant of Jesus that says to love everybody and treat everybody the way that Jesus has treated us. Now, we don't always measure up to that standard that we subscribe to, whatever the standard is that you subscribe to. And when we mess up and fall short of whatever standard we are trying to measure up to, at work, at school, family rules, whatever, when we get busted, we get caught with our hand in the cookie jar, most people have an auto response set up. It's our way of justifying our failure. You know you messed up. Everybody else knows you messed up. They saw you. You got caught. So our auto defense is this. Well, nobody's perfect. That is exactly what the Apostle Paul is trying to get across to us. When you acknowledge that you're not perfect, when you say that, you're saying there is a law, there is a standard, there is an ethic that you haven't lived up to. It exists, and you're saying, I've fallen short. Now, whenever you acknowledge no one's perfect, you're acknowledging that there is a perfect. Let's talk about it. There it is, and I'm not that. And there's a subtle sense of accountability to something that is over you, and you're under that. Paul goes on and he says this. He says, now we know that whatever the law says, it says to those who are under the law, so that what? Is the purpose so that we can be perfect people? He says, no. That's not the purpose at all. So that every mouth may be silenced. Ooh, it's tight, but it's right. It's going to get good up in here. Here we go now. So that every mouth may be silenced and the whole world, that's everybody in this room and everybody outside of this room, so that the whole world would be held accountable to God. Not accountable to PT, not accountable to you, not accountable to somebody else, but the whole world would be accountable to God. Paul says there is a law that we are all aware of in some specific or general way, and we know that we all fall short, and therefore we all are going to feel accountable. But he says there's good news, because the reason for the tension and the guilt, listen now, so important. The reason for the tension and the guilt isn't so that you're going to be perfect. It's not so you can be perfect. That's not his point at all. The point of the law, the mess, the chaos, or the tension is so that we would all be silenced, especially when we're about to look at others and be critical of them, because now we realize that we fall short too. We're all a hot mess. Let's just say that. We are a hot mess. Say it. Let's make it very personal. I am a hot mess. Telling you, no one has room to be critical of others. We're all accountable to the source of the law that we fall short of, whether it's God, whether it's your conscience, whether it's Old Testament, New Testament, whatever it is, we're all accountable to that law, and we're all going to fall short of it. This is why Jesus says, before you judge somebody else, you need to look in the mirror. You need to look in the mirror. And when you look in the mirror and you see that big plank in your eye, wouldn't it be wise to just be silent? And that's just a nice way of saying, shut your pie hole. Right? Because the whole world is held accountable to God. And then Paul says this, therefore no one will be declared righteous in God's sight by the works of the law. In other words, you'll never be so good at trying to measure up to the law on your own that God will ever look at you and declare you righteous or good enough. You're always going to fall short. You just can't keep it. Now look at this. Rather, through the law, whether it's God's law, the law of your conscience, whatever it is that you believe that you're under that's over you, through the law, we become conscious of our sin or of our failure. Now, maybe this is why you don't like church. I don't know. It's one of the reasons you quit going to church. Nobody likes to be reminded that they don't measure up, or that they're not what they ought to be, and people don't like hearing that these days. But listen, Christian folk, there's no way to escape this. There's no way for non-Christians to escape this, because they all subscribe to some standard. Because I'm a Christian, though, when I read the New Testament, I'm reminded that I don't love my neighbor like I should. Right? I don't forgive like I should. I hold grudges when I shouldn't. I'm reminded of the standard, because the Scripture, the law of God, is a mirror, and mirrors don't lie. And aren't you thankful that they don't laugh? That's a wonderful thing. So let me ask you a question, and this is uncomfortable, but this is a good question. What standard are you under? What standard have you placed yourself under? Is it the Old Testament, the New Testament, another religion, your conscience? Whatever it is, what does the standard that you're under remind you of? In other words, how does it poke you and prod you? How does it remind you? And usually, isn't it usually the same thing, whatever it is, over and over, that it keeps reminding us of? It keeps poking us, usually an area of our lives where we've fallen short, right? Isn't it that habit that you can't break, the addiction that you just can't seem to quit? You've told your parents, I'll never do it again, but you keep finding yourself right back in the same mess that you were in before. Because in that moment, you're experiencing the law for the exact reason that God gave it. It's a mirror and it's a reminder. It's a mirror and it's a reminder. And then 3 verses later, he gives us his bottom line. Paul sums up this argument and he says this, for all, everybody say all. And this isn't just for religious people, he says, for all have sinned. That's the big Bible word, right? What do you mean sin, Paul? Can you break that down for us? And Paul says, sure, I'll break it down. For all have sinned and fall short, because falling short is what it means to sin. And fall short of the glory of God. You see, I fall short of my own standard. My own standard, my own conscience. I fall short of that. I can't even be what I think I need to be most of the time. I mess up all the time. I'm glad there are people that will forgive me for that. There's some that won't, but some people will. Aren't you glad that there's people in your life that will forgive you for it? And doesn't it just blow their mind when you mess up and they go tell somebody, you ain't going to believe what so-and-so did, if that person can say, he confesses to that all the time. He says he's a hot mess. He's not trying to lie or keep that from anybody. But the thing is, he says, you're a hot mess too. It just takes the argument right away, right? That's why the word said, then we should be silent. It shouldn't be a rumble out there going on when somebody messes up or when somebody does something other people don't like, because you realize before you start trying to remove a speck out of somebody else's eye, you got to pull the plank out of your own. Can I have a witness on that? And I actually mentioned a name in the first service from a nationally known person, and I felt guilty immediately, and I had to apologize. So I'm not going to do it again. Don't go back and watch the video from the first service either. It was a mistake on my part. But he said, all have sinned, and we fall short of our own standard. In other words, I can't even think of who I need to be and be that person. So we all do that. Everybody is silenced because everybody falls short of the glory, the magnificence, the greatness, the perfection of God. None of us are going to measure up. And he's reminding us of the reason that we recognize a mess when we see one. Watch this now. Stay with me on this, because let me tell you something, folks. Get this. What I'm teaching to you today is the reason that people, even older adults, when this light goes on, this is the reason. They've lived their whole life pushing away from faith, but when this light goes on, I've seen, and I'm going to give you a great example, I've seen men, women, older men and older women, when this light goes on, surrender their heart and their lives to Jesus Christ. This is a big deal. It's a huge deal, and if you can get this, it'll just open up your world to the power and the presence of God. In other words, everybody is silenced because everybody falls short of the glory of God, the magnificence, the greatness, the powerful perfection of God. And he's reminded us of the reason. He's reminding us of the reason. It's because every mess has a reference point. Watch this now. You know what the marriage is supposed to look like. You know how you should behave and how you should respond. You know you should be able to break away from that habit. You know that you shouldn't be in that relationship. Every mess has a reference point, and Paul says it is the awareness of our own hot mess that awakens us to something outside of us to which we are all accountable. This is his point. That the awareness of our mess, I can't even live up to my own expectations, so I certainly can't live up to God's. So my natural flow as a human being is, well, I'm not doing good. I need to try harder. I need to work on this. I need to get this right. I gotta come up with a plan. And Paul says, no. That's wrong. That's not the right approach. He said, wait a minute. God didn't establish the standard. He didn't set up the law so that you would try harder. God doesn't poke your conscience so that you'll just become a better person. Man, there were so many hundreds of laws, over 700 in the original law, and God didn't just give 700 laws to make everybody comply. He set them up. They didn't even know He was setting them up. He set them up. There was no way they were going to keep all that law. There's no way you're going to measure up to your own standard, much less to God's. He set us up for failure. He made sure. God doesn't poke your conscience so that you'll just become a better person. God speaks to you through your conscience, and God reminds you so that you will become aware that there's someone outside of you. I got goosebumps, man, I'm telling you. There's somebody outside of you to whom you are accountable and who is over you and you under him. When that light goes on, it's a game changer. Now, I'll give you an example, real-life example. Most of you have heard of C.S. Lewis. He was a brilliant man, lived during the Second World War era, and he found Jesus as an adult. He wrote the Chronicles of Narnia. Did you see the movies? Great movies. Another great book, I think actually the first Christian book that he wrote was called Mere Christianity. And it's a tough read. It's a short read, but you have to read it several times to digest it. But in this book, C.S. Lewis said this. He said, when I watch two people quarrel, he's given an example of why he came to faith in Jesus Christ. And if you'll lean into this, it's a game changer. He said, when I watch two people quarrel or fight, they're having a heated debate, here's what I'm aware of. Those two people are both appealing to a standard that neither of them created and neither of them can escape. He says two people are quarreling, and he gives an example. He said, one says, you're not being fair. and the other person defends themselves. I'm being fair. You're not being fair, right? And it just keeps going. And every argument they approach, they have a different perspective. Same idea, but they see it totally different. So they argue about it. Now, he says whenever people quarrel, if you watch, this is a big deal. If you watch, he said they're both appealing to a standard that is outside of them that neither of them created. They didn't come up with this. Where did the standard come from? And then he says this. This is so powerful. He said, rarely in a quarrel between two people will you hear one of them say, well, to hell with your standard. To hell with your standard. Watch this now. So powerful. In other words, he's saying, nobody ever says, well, let's just forget justice. Let's forget mercy. Let's forget sensitivity. Forget being a good husband. Forget being a great wife. Forget all that. No one, he says, ever dumps the standard. They don't dump the standard, but they do argue that they're keeping the standard better than the other person. And this just bugged C.S. Lewis to death when he was not a Christian, but he was checking out the whole faith thing. Why is it that all over the world there's this thing that we feel accountable to, we just can't get rid of, and we clearly didn't create it? It's a standard that we didn't set. Because if we had created the standard, we would just dump it. And then we wouldn't feel guilty anymore, right? We'd just get rid of it. And in the first chapter of Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis says this: the law of gravity tells you what stones do if you drop them. In other words, the natural law of gravity tells you what's going to happen to a stone if you hold it out in your hand and then just let it go, right? And then he goes on, he talks about all the natural laws and how they make the universe very, very predictable. Natural laws, as an example, natural laws, if you play golf, are why you can become a better golfer. Because gravity doesn't shift. It doesn't change every 30 minutes and change the way that you approach or hit the ball, right? In other words, the laws of nature are predictable. They're observable. He says, so everybody knows when you drop a rock or stone what's going to happen. But look what he says next. This is so powerful, and I hope you get it. But the law of human nature tells you what human beings ought to do and what they ought not do. The law of human nature says if you're kind and gentle, if you're good to people, life goes better. If you eat right, things go better. If you refuse to become addicted to anything, things go better. In other words, we know what the laws of human nature are, which remove the tension from our humanity if we just abide by those laws. Are y'all tracking? Still with me? He said, and this is a quote, he said, but unlike any other area in the whole universe that we know of, when it comes to the laws of human nature, even though we know what they are, he said, but we don't do them. We don't do them. And it just bugged him, and he's like, what is that? And he says this: human beings all over the earth have this curious idea that they ought to behave in a certain way, and they can't shake that. Doesn't matter who you are. Those who do know the penalty for doing so, right? Average people never say, I shouldn't be sensitive. Sensitivity's stupid. I shouldn't honor other people. That's stupid. Or I shouldn't be fair. That's just stupid. He says there's this built-in, heart-driven sense of ethics and morality that we just can't shake. And then he caps it off with this, and this right here is what drove C.S. Lewis as a mature adult to become a believer, a Christian. He said there is something above and beyond the ordinary facts of men's behavior, and yet quite definitely real. It's not something that we imagined. We didn't create it, but we find it pressing on us. This is powerful. He continued, we have all felt the pressure of conscience. Paul said this a different way. C.S. Lewis said it like this: we've all felt the pressure of conscience. That pressure is the gracious presence of God, and we can't escape it. It is universal in every single culture. Woo! Y'all, I got goosebumps, so help me. Second time in a row. This is so powerful. It's a game changer. This is not God pressing on us so that we'll be better people. It's God pressing on us so that we will acknowledge and recognize God. God didn't give over 700 laws in the Old Testament so that they would actually try to keep all of the laws. They tried and failed. He knew when He gave it to them they were never going to measure up. He did it so eventually they would acknowledge, I'm a hot mess. I can't do this. I need help. Where's your help come from? My help comes from the Lord. Man, it comes from the Lord. And then, once you notice this, our mouths will be silenced. When you realize that I can't measure up, I'm a hot mess. And we're going to realize there is a law, there is a standard that we cannot maintain consistently. Therefore, all the people in the whole earth are silenced in the presence of God. And then you won't be critical of someone else's hot mess because you realize as you enter God's presence that you are a hot mess yourself. That's better preaching than what you think it is. And again, once we acknowledge our own hot mess and we acknowledge that we fall short of our own standard, and certainly God's standard, then we're a step away from acknowledging God. Now, the pressure that you feel is not pressure from God to just be a better person or to try to be a more perfect person. It's a reminder that there is a God that wants you to be aware that He is there. He's there. There is a perfect that none of us will ever be until we see Jesus. And the Bible says, then we shall be like Him. For we shall be changed in the moment, in the twinkling of an eye. Right? And it's the pathway, the portal, the channel, the window, the lens to begin understanding the presence and the power of our Heavenly Father. Now, the moral of the story today is simply this. We all have something in common. What is it? We're all a hot mess. Religious, non-religious, Christian, non-Christian, some other religion. What we all have in common is the mess that we make. Do you know what that means? Think about this, man. This shook me up. It means that you have something in common with the person that you despise the most. You have something in common with the group that you despise the most. I come so close to just naming some that I know y'all don't like, but I thought I'd end on a high note. But I've got some good news for you. Paul says this, when you recognize you are a hot mess, you won't be critical of others, you will remain silent. You'll remain silent. Wouldn't it be awesome if people would just realize that? And you know how to take their argument away? Go ahead and admit, I'm a hot mess. I mean, where do they go from there? I stand up here all the time and I tell you, look, I'm the most imperfect person I know. I mean, I don't get it right. I'm very transparent about that. And if you want a preacher that's other than that will lie to you, go somewhere else. Because here we're going to tell you the truth. We're all a hot mess. All of us, everybody in the room. So let me send you out of here with a homework assignment. This week, when you see somebody, second part of your homework assignment, because the first part, don't forget, change your profile picture. Let's be real. Oh, and tag me in it. Just hashtag my hot mess. Please, please make my afternoon grand. Let's do this. Let's do it. Come on, people. Let's be real. Let's be real. My hot mess, and post a pic, okay? You don't have to make it your profile picture, but that would be so much better. So here's the homework assignment, part 2. When you see somebody making a mess this week, listen, folks, if we could get this, it would bring harmony to the world like you have never seen. People that are mad at you and upset with you, they'll calm down if we could just get this. If we could get it, if you could get it, if the world could get it. So when somebody is making a mess out there, whoever, wherever, whatever, when you see the mess this week, instead of being critical, instead of being judgmental, instead of setting yourself apart, instead of thinking to yourself, at least I'm not like them. High and mighty kind of thing. At least I'm not like them. Instead of, I don't even want to go talk to them. Kind of a high and mighty attitude. Instead of that, I want you to whisper under your breath this phrase right here. Throw it up there for me, if you will. I know a hot mess when I see one because I am one. Stand to your feet. Let's practice this. A hot mess is what brings us all together. It's what everybody in the room has in common. Are you tracking? I love you guys. I love pastoring a hot mess church. I don't mind going to county jail and bailing you out. If Sylvia gets a bonus, we'll set it aside and we'll save it for you because you're a hot mess. You know, whatever your hot mess is, we'll try to help you through it. But a hot mess is what brings us all together. Let's say it in full voice together. And I want you to say it. I want you to say it like you believe it, okay? Because I'm telling you, this is so liberating. When you can admit this, when you can admit, hey, I'm a hot mess, let me tell you what you do. You disarm those. You disarm your detractors. They don't have anything else to argue against you. Why am I so transparent? I stand up here every week and tell you I'm a hot mess. I don't use that vernacular or that verbiage, but you know it, and I know it. I don't get it right a lot of the times. And it just disarms people. They ain't got nothing to throw at you, you know. And I tell people all the time, there's enough stuff that's true about me for you to go out there and talk about. You don't have to make anything up, right? But I want you to say it, because when you say it, it liberates your own spirit, your own soul, and it will remind you, hey, before I look down my nose at somebody else and I start talking bad about them, I'm going to remember that they may have a speck of dust in their eye, but Jesus said, I have to pull the plank out of my eye because I got a bigger problem, bigger issue. So in full voice, are you ready? Here we go. Let's say it like we mean it. I know a hot mess when I see one because I am one. Let's do it together in 3, 2, 1. I know a hot mess when I see one because I am one.